a man awaiting death, a nation plunged into the abyss of chaos. And in the heart of that turmoil, a revelation so profound it would forever alter the destiny of humanity. Imagine for a moment that you are a silent witness, standing at the precipice of eternity, watching the very moment when God Almighty tears the veil between heaven and earth. He looks across the expanse of history, past kings and conquerors, past empires and epics, and chooses only one man, a mortal trembling in the face of infinity, to write down the greatest secret in the annals of time. Have you ever paused, your fingers tracing the ancient words in your Bible, and wondered why, out of 66 sacred books, is the scroll of Isaiah considered the most extraordinary, the most unsettling, the most breathtakingly accurate? Why is this man, who lived 7 centuries before the birth of Christ, called the evangelist of the Old Testament? What is it about his words, his visions, his warnings, that made even Jesus, the Son of God, quote him more than any other prophet? Today, you are not merely going to learn about history. You are going to discover something that will fundamentally change the way you read the Bible, the way you perceive time, and perhaps even the way you see your own life's purpose. Get ready, because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is a secret code, a divine encryption reserved for those with ears to hear in our generation. This is the story of a book that foretold the virgin birth with chilling clarity 700 years before it happened. A book that described the horror of the crucifixion with terrifying, graphic precision long before the Roman Empire had even conceived of death by a cross. A book that painted the most detailed, intimate, and accurate portrait of the Messiah ever committed to parchment. The content you are about to experience is offered freely, but the impact it can have on your soul, on your very existence, is truly profound. If this message finds a home in your heart, if it resonates with the deep questions you have carried in silence, return that gift with a simple gesture. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications. This single act helps us to continue spreading this word, to reach more hearts, to keep this light shining every single day. And what if I were to tell you that Isaiah did not just speak about a distant past or a far-off future? What if I told you he brought direct, urgent messages for our generation, that within his ancient scroll lie warnings and promises that are being fulfilled right now, before our very eyes, in the headlines of our newspapers and the whispers of our uncertain world? Do you know the secret behind why Isaiah is often called the fifth gospel? It is a detail so perfect, so mathematically impossible to be a coincidence, that it serves as God's divine signature. The book of Isaiah contains 66 chapters. The Holy Bible, in its entirety, contains 66 books. But the parallel runs deeper into the very structure of God's plan for humanity. The first 39 chapters of Isaiah are a thunderous declaration of God's law, judgment, and the consequences of sin, mirroring with perfect symmetry the 39 books of the Old Testament. But then, at chapter 40, the tone shifts. The storm of judgment gives way to a message of comfort, grace, and breathtaking hope. The final 27 chapters of Isaiah are a song of redemption, a promise of a coming Savior, perfectly reflecting the 27 books of the New Testament. Coincidence? To believe so requires more faith than to believe in the miracle itself. What you are about to discover will take your breath away, because the book of Isaiah holds prophecies so exact, so impossibly predictive, that for centuries, the most brilliant skeptics and hardened atheists have tried to dismantle them, have searched desperately for any logical explanation, and have failed. Every single time. They have argued that the book must have been written by multiple authors, that it must have been edited after the events took place, but the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient copies of Isaiah dating from before the time of Christ, shattered their theories into dust, proving the single authorship and the stunning, preemptive accuracy of the text. Get ready for a journey that will not just inform you, but transform your faith. Because by the end of this story, by the time you have walked in Isaiah's footsteps and seen what he saw, you will never, ever see the Bible in the same way again. The scroll is about to be unrolled. The code is about to be broken. And the secret of the ages is about to be revealed. That year, Jerusalem was a city breathing in shadows. The death of King Uzziah had not just ended a reign, it had extinguished a light, casting a deep, pervasive wave of fear and insecurity across the entire kingdom of Judah. For 52 long years, his name had been synonymous with stability, with prosperity and safety. Now his passing was like the breaking of a dam, and the people could hear the roar of an approaching flood. In the cobblestone streets, panic flowed like water in the gutters, silent, yet visible in the haunted eyes of every merchant, every mother, every soldier. The air itself seemed thick with anxiety, a palpable miasma of doubt that clung to the ancient stones of the city walls. Isaiah, a young priest from an honored and noble lineage, a man whose blood ran with the history of his people, watched it all with a growing and righteous concern that felt like a fire in his bones. He had been raised on the glorious stories of God's power, had witnessed the solemn rituals of the temple since he was a boy, the scent of incense and sacrificial smoke a permanent memory in his soul. But now it seemed Jerusalem had lost its way, its compass spinning wildly without a magnetic north. The spiritual decay was a cancer, eating at the heart of the holy city. Corruption and idolatry, once whispered sins committed in secret, had begun to seep into the very heart of public life. Nobles and even fellow priests, men who were meant to be living examples of God's righteousness, now sought only their own gain, their prayers, a hollow performance to mask their greed. Isaiah felt a profound and unsettling trouble in his spirit. One afternoon, sitting in a small, stark chamber near the temple, Isaiah meditated in silence, the weight of his city pressing down on him. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge, slamming the wooden shutters with a violent force, as if nature itself was issuing a warning of what was to come. He felt an undeniable premonition that something was about to change, to break, to be irrevocably altered. His heart was a battlefield of fear and a strange, unnerving anticipation. Suddenly, the chamber door burst open, shattering the heavy silence. Brother Isaiah, shouted Jeremiah, his closest friend, his face pale and his breathing ragged. Have you heard the news? The northern borders are under threat. The Assyrians, those dogs of war, they are marching against us. The word in the streets is that with Uzziah dead, we are nothing more than easy prey. Isaiah took a long, slow breath, steadying his own racing heart before answering, "And our people, Jeremiah, how are they reacting to this threat?" Jeremiah's shoulders slumped, and he lowered his head, the picture of dejection. "They are desperate, Isaiah. Lost. Some of the king's advisors speak of forming alliances with Egypt, with nations that worship carved idols and pagan gods. They seek salvation from men, not from the Lord." Isaiah's expression grew even darker, his jaw tightening. "Jeremiah," he said, his voice low but intense, "our salvation does not lie in human treaties or foreign armies. It has never been so. We must return to the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Jeremiah looked deeply into Isaiah's eyes, his own filled with a pragmatist's doubt. "But who will listen to such a message in times like these, my friend? When the enemy's swords are at our throats, who will have the patience to hear your words of repentance?" Isaiah remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where dark, bruised clouds began to gather like an invading army. "Perhaps no one will hear me now," he finally said. "But someone must speak. Someone must remind our people who their true king is." Jeremiah nodded, moved in spite of his fear by the unwavering conviction in his friend's voice. Later, walking toward the temple, Isaiah's heart ached with every step. He saw men arguing, their voices sharp with fear. In the streets, he saw women weeping for the sons, who might soon be called to a war they could not win. An elderly priest, his face a roadmap of despair, approached Isaiah with a disheartened look. "Young Isaiah, do you truly believe God still hears us? Look around you. The heavens are silent. God has abandoned us." Isaiah replied, his voice calm but firm, a rock against the tide of hopelessness. "God would never abandon us, elder. It is we who have turned away from him." The old man simply shook his head in bitter disbelief and slowly, painfully shuffled away. Upon entering the hallowed grounds of the temple, a heavy silence hung in the air, so thick it was almost tangible. The usual sounds of prayer and activity were muted, replaced by an atmosphere of dread. Isaiah approached the great altar of burnt offering, knelt slowly upon the cold stone, and began to pray, his soul crying out from the depths of his being, "God of our fathers, we are lost. Our nation is a ship without a rudder, drifting from your law. Our hope is a dying ember. Where else can we look but to you? Show us your face, Lord. Speak to us." As he prayed, Isaiah felt a powerful, supernatural wind sweep through the temple, not from an open door, but from within the Holy of Holies itself. It gently, then more forcefully, shook the sacred veil that separated man from the direct presence of God. An indescribable presence began to fill the space, intense, overwhelming, and terrifyingly holy. A radiant light, brighter than 1,000 suns, emerged from behind the veil, piercing through the fabric, piercing through him with a brilliance too great for mortal eyes to endure. Isaiah's eyes filled with tears as his body began to tremble uncontrollably. "O Lord," he cried out, his voice a trembling whisper, "what am I seeing?" A voice, not of a single being, but a chorus that was also one, resounded deep and majestic, shaking the very foundations of the temple. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Isaiah fell to the ground as if struck, unable to withstand the sheer force of the vision. In that moment of absolute holiness, every hidden sin, every impure thought, every failing of his life was laid bare before him. He felt utterly unclean, a stain upon the sacred floor. He cried out in the agony of self-realization, his voice choked with despair, "Woe is me, for I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." He believed in that moment he would be unmade, dissolved by the purity he was witnessing. Then a celestial being, a seraph with 6 wings of fire, swiftly flew to the altar, taking a glowing, burning coal with a pair of golden tongs. Isaiah felt his heart hammer against his ribs, convinced his end had come. The being approached, its movements fluid and full of a calm and terrible mercy, reaching out the burning coal toward the young priest's lips. "Do not fear, Isaiah," the seraph said, its voice a paradox of gentleness and immense power. "This has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin is forgiven." The pain Isaiah felt as the coal seared his flesh was deep, a burning, agonizing fire, but it was mixed with a liberating purity. It was the pain of poison being burned away. He cried out, not just from the physical shock, but from the spiritual transformation taking place within him. Then, the divine voice of God echoed again, a question that resonated through all of creation: "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Isaiah, his lips still burning, slowly raised his head. The fear was gone, replaced by a consuming fire of purpose. Even knowing the trials he would face, the rejection that awaited him, he felt compelled by a love and awe that transcended all earthly logic. With a voice now cleansed and resolute, he lifted his voice and answered the call that would define his life and shape the course of history. "Here am I, Lord. Send me." Yet little did he know the full scope of what he had seen in that temple, the glory, the holiness, and a terrifying hidden detail in the vision would haunt him for the rest of his life. The heat still burned on Isaiah's lips, a phantom fire that pulsed with every beat of his heart. Even after the seraph had withdrawn with the burning coal, the sensation remained a divine brand, marking him as a vessel for a message not his own. It was a peculiar pain, mingled with an inexplicable sense of relief, as if with every passing second, decades of unspoken impurity were being systematically scoured from the very essence of his being. Isaiah remained kneeling on the cold, unforgiving temple floor, his eyes squeezed shut, breathing in deep, ragged gasps. His entire body trembled, not from fear any longer, but from the aftershock of divine contact. His hands, resting on the stone, could barely support his weight. He existed in a liminal space, a razor's edge between life and death, between the finite human and the infinite divine. A voice, soft yet impossibly firm, broke the profound silence. "Rise, Isaiah." He opened his eyes with a monumental effort. Before him, still hovering in the air that shimmered with residual glory, was the seraph who had touched his lips. The light surrounding the celestial being was less blinding now, a gentle luminescence, but the sacred power of the place remained undeniably thick in the air. "Your guilt has been removed," the seraph repeated, its voice like the chiming of a distant crystal bell. "Your sin has been forgiven." Isaiah's own voice was a raw, hesitant whisper. Why me? I am nothing more than a fragile man, a sinner like all the others. My lips are as unclean as any in Jerusalem." The seraph offered a serene, enigmatic smile, as if the answer were too obvious, too fundamental to be articulated in human language. Then, the very atmosphere in the temple began to vibrate once more. A voice, more powerful, more majestic, more terrifyingly beautiful than any Isaiah had ever heard or could ever imagine, echoed from the throne, through the walls and into the marrow of his bones. "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah felt his heart stop for a single eternal moment. The question seemed to hang in the air, a cosmic inquiry awaiting a response, as if the fate of the universe itself paused for the decision of a single trembling man. He glanced around instinctively, searching for someone else, someone worthier, stronger, holier, who might take on such an immeasurable responsibility. But the temple was empty, save for the celestial beings and the overwhelming, all-consuming presence of God. I am here." His voice came out weak at first, a cracked and reedy sound. But then, as he spoke, a new vigor, a supernatural strength began to rise from the depths of his soul. "Here am I." "Send me," the words left his lips before his mind could fully process their consequence. It was not a decision born of logic or ambition, but a primal response of the soul to its creator. It was an impulse, a deep, inner certainty that this was the sole purpose for which he had been born. For a brief moment, an absolute silence fell. Not even the seraphim sang their ceaseless hymn. Only the sound of Isaiah's own heavy breathing filled the sacred space. Suddenly, the light around the throne intensified, growing brighter and brighter, as if heaven itself was roaring its approval of his answer. The seraph before him drew closer once more, looking him in the eyes with a gaze that held both infinite compassion and a solemn, heartbreaking gravity. "Then listen carefully, Isaiah," the being said, its voice now somber. "The path you have just chosen will not be easy. Your words will be like hammers breaking stone, but they will strike hearts that have turned to stone. You will speak truth to the people, but they will deliberately shut their ears. You will prophesy my will, but they will choose not to believe." Isaiah furrowed his brow, a cold knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. "Lord, how long will this go on? Until when will they refuse to listen?" The answer came not from the seraph, but directly from the throne, a voice like thunder rumbling through the temple walls. "Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are deserted and the fields are utterly desolate, until the Lord drives the people far away and the land is left in forsakenness." Isaiah's blood ran cold. His hands, which had been steady, began to tremble again. He sensed that this mission was far greater, far heavier, and far more tragic than he had ever imagined. The seraph then made a gesture toward him, a final word of paradoxical promise. But even in the midst of this utter destruction, a remnant will remain. Like a great oak felled by the axe, a stump will survive. And from that stump, a holy seed will sprout new life. Isaiah took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to absorb the crushing weight of it all. He felt small, powerless, utterly inadequate for the task, yet at the same time, a new fire began to burn in his chest, a fire of divine purpose that no rejection, no pain, and no future suffering could ever extinguish. Still on his knees, he closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself spiritually for the long, painful road that was to come. When he opened his eyes again, the temple appeared to have returned to normal. The smoke was gone. The radiant light had faded. The seraphim were no longer visible to his mortal sight. But Isaiah knew, with every fiber of his being, that his life would never be the same. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, looking toward the altar with a mixture of profound awe and holy terror. As he stepped out of the temple, the first rays of the morning sun pierced through the clouds, and it was as if the heavens were whispering to him, "This is only the beginning." Isaiah took a few steps into the temple courtyard, looking toward the city where the people were already going about their daily routines, completely and blissfully unaware of the supernatural transaction he had just experienced. From afar, his friend Jeremiah spotted him and ran to him, his face etched with worry. "Isaiah, where were you? I was afraid. But you look different." Isaiah, his eyes still seeming to glow with an otherworldly light, simply managed a faint smile. He took a deep breath of the cool morning air and replied, "Jeremiah, I believe God has finally given me a mission." Jeremiah stared at him, startled by the intensity in his friend's gaze. "What kind of mission?" Isaiah looked to the horizon, his expression hardening into one of serious, solemn resolve. "A mission that will hurt," he answered, his voice devoid of any hesitation, "more than I can possibly imagine." And even as he spoke those words, he had no true idea of just how painful his mission would truly be. The days that followed were a slow, grinding descent into a state of collective dread. Jerusalem had become a city holding its breath, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. Each morning brought with it a fresh wave of bad news, like a tide of filth washing over the city walls. Battles lost on the northern front. Political alliances, once thought solid, crumbling like sun-baked clay. And a new, insidious enemy was beginning to creep into the city's poorest quarters: hunger. The people walked the streets with their heads bowed, their eyes dull and listless, carrying on their backs the invisible but crushing weight of hopelessness. Isaiah, however, remained a solitary pillar of steadfast conviction. Every morning, before the sun had even bled its first light across the horizon, he would climb one of the hills, overlooking the city, to pray, to seek the face of the God who had sent him on this agonizing mission. "Lord," he would whisper, his voice carried away by the cold wind, "my people are weary. We are on the verge of total collapse. We need a word from you, a tangible sign, a single ray of light in this suffocating darkness." One cloudy, oppressive afternoon, as Isaiah was returning from the temple, a royal guardsman intercepted him. The man's face was grim. "Prophet Isaiah, King Ahaz has summoned you to the royal palace." Immediately, the walk to the palace felt like a march to his own trial. King Ahaz, a man now sitting on the throne of David, was nothing like his forebears. He was a reed in the wind, insecure, hesitant, and now utterly consumed by fear. The existential threat of a joint invasion from the neighboring kingdoms of Israel and Syria had driven the monarch into a state of frantic panic. Upon entering the grand throne room, Isaiah immediately sensed the suffocating tension. The air was thick with the scent of nervous sweat and stale incense. Armed guards lined the walls, their hands clutching their spears, their eyes darting nervously. Advisors huddled in small, anxious groups, murmuring in hushed, desperate tones. The faces were all pale, all filled with a shared, unspoken worry. King Ahaz sat slumped on his magnificent throne, the golden lions on its arms seeming to mock his weakness. He was wringing his hands, his royal robes, a stark contrast to his terrified demeanor. Isaiah the king called out, his voice thin and desperate. "You, the man of God, what does your God say about all of this? We are surrounded by enemies, my heart. My heart is consumed by fear. It trembles like the trees of the forest in a great storm." Isaiah took a deep, centering breath. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, drawing strength not from his own courage, but from the memory of the fire in the temple. Then he stepped closer to the throne, his presence a stark contrast to the court's frantic energy. "Hear me, O house of David," he began, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the murmurs. "Thus says the Lord, do not be faint-hearted. Do not fear these two smoldering stubs of firewood, these pompous kings of Syria and Israel. Their fury is but smoke, and it will soon vanish." King Ahaz looked at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "But how can I not be afraid, prophet? Their armies are already at our gates. They are not smoke. They are sharpened steel and hungry spears." Isaiah remained unmoved, his gaze locked on the frightened king. "If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. But because you are weak, God will give you a sign. Ask for a sign, any sign, as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven, something that will prove he is still in control." Ahaz, his faith already turning towards a potential alliance with the pagan empire of Assyria, waved a dismissive hand. "I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test." It was a pious excuse to mask his faithless heart. Isaiah's expression hardened. It was not a request. It was a command. He paused, letting the silence in the room grow heavy, drawing every eye towards him. He looked straight into the king's eyes, and then beyond him, as if speaking to all future generations. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign," he declared, his voice resonating with divine authority. "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel." A heavy, profound silence fell over the throne room. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the space. "What?" asked Ahaz, his face a mask of utter confusion. "A virgin conceiving. That is impossible. It is a madman's riddle." The advisors around him began to murmur, the sound like a nest of disturbed hornets. Doubtful glances were exchanged. "This makes no sense," whispered one, a grizzled general who wanted a military solution, not a mystical one. "Isaiah, you speak in confusing riddles," said another, an irritated diplomat who had been arguing for an alliance with Egypt. "We need armies, not babies." Jeremiah, who had accompanied Isaiah to the palace, stepped closer and whispered, his own face pale with shock. "Isaiah, are you certain of what you heard, a virgin?" Isaiah nodded, his gaze unwavering, his conviction absolute. "Absolutely." As they left the palace, the king and his court, already buzzing with mockery and disbelief, Jeremiah walked beside Isaiah, still stunned. "A virgin, Isaiah, how can such a thing happen? It violates the very laws of nature that God himself created." Isaiah stopped in the middle of the courtyard and turned to his friend. "I do not know how, Jeremiah. My mind cannot grasp the mechanics of it. But I know this is what God has revealed to me. And I know that one day that child will be born, and his name will mean what our people have forgotten: God with us." "But the people," Jeremiah insisted, his voice fraught with worry, "they hardly believe the prophecies of judgment you already speak. How can they possibly accept something as impossible as this? They will think you have finally lost your mind." Isaiah looked up at the sky, now covered in a uniform blanket of gray clouds. "I do not understand it all either, my friend," he admitted. "But my task is not to understand. It is to speak." In the days that followed, the news of the bizarre prophecy spread through Jerusalem like a contagion. Wherever Isaiah went, he heard the whispered comments, the open laughter. "A son from a virgin. It is madness," some said. "The prophet's grief has finally made him delusional," others concluded. There were snickers, biting sarcasm, and even direct, angry insults. One morning, as he walked toward the temple, Isaiah was approached by a group of boisterous young men, off-duty soldiers looking for sport. "Hey, prophet," one of them shouted, a cruel grin on his face. "When is your Immanuel coming? Is his mother from a village we know?" The others howled with laughter. "We get it, old man, you love metaphors, right? A virgin, nation giving birth to hope." Isaiah stopped and looked at them, his expression one of calm pity, not anger. "Laugh today. Mock now. But the words of the Lord do not fail, and they are not metaphors." The group simply burst into another round of laughter as they swaggered away, leaving Isaiah standing alone in their wake. That night, back in his small, quiet home, Isaiah knelt again, as he had done so many times before. The weight of the ridicule was heavy. The pain of being a public spectacle was sharp. "Lord," he prayed, his voice a broken whisper, "why do you show me things my own mind cannot grasp? Why do you make me proclaim a sign so mysterious that it turns me into a fool in the eyes of my people?" The silence of the night was his only answer. And then, as he sat there, his eyes closed and his heart heavy, Isaiah had another brief, fleeting vision. He saw a woman, bathed in a soft, ethereal light, her face radiating a purity he had never seen on earth. Her belly was swollen with child, and then he saw the baby in her arms, a small, perfect child, whose presence seemed to emanate a profound peace that calmed Isaiah's own troubled soul. "Immanuel," he whispered, as tears began to stream down his face. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him in the darkness of his room. Isaiah remained motionless, struggling to breathe, the reality of what he had seen crashing down upon him. It was not a metaphor, it was real. "This defies all human logic," he whispered to the shadows as the tears continued to fall. He was beginning to realize that the God who had called him operated on a plane of existence where the impossible was merely a starting point. He had seen a sign that defied all human logic. And he knew, with a terrifying and thrilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The days dragged on, each one a carbon copy of the last. Jerusalem remained a city submerged in a thick fog of uncertainty. The military threats on the borders were a constant dull ache in the collective consciousness, and hunger was beginning to invade the poorest homes like a silent, creeping thief. The people walked the streets with their heads down, their eyes dull, their backs bent under the heavy weight of hopelessness. The prophecy of Immanuel, far from being a comfort, had become another source of derision, a bizarre footnote in the city's litany of woes. Isaiah, however, remained steadfast. His mission was not contingent on public approval. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, he climbed one of the hills near the city to pray, to anchor his soul to the one unchanging reality in his tumultuous world. "Lord," he whispered one morning, his eyes lifted to the still dark sky, a canopy of velvet pricked with the last fading stars. "My people are weary. We are on the verge of collapse. The sign you gave the king has become a joke in the mouths of fools. We need a word that is not a riddle. We need a sign that is not a mystery. We need a light we can see now." That morning, while still on his knees, his face pressed to the cold, damp earth, something extraordinary happened. Isaiah felt his body begin to tremble, not with cold, but with the familiar prelude to a divine encounter. A new vision, potent and overwhelming, filled his mind. It was as if the heavens had been torn open directly above him, and he was staring into the very heart of God's future plan. He saw a people, his people, walking in an impenetrable, suffocating darkness. It was a spiritual darkness, deeper than any night, a land of the shadow of death. But then, a light began to dawn on the horizon. Not the gentle light of morning, but a great, brilliant, explosive light that shattered the darkness and sent shadows fleeing. He saw a child, but this was not the quiet, mysterious baby Immanuel from his previous vision. There was a special, sovereign glow around this child, as though the very glory and authority of God rested upon his small figure. A heavenly voice, a chorus of thousands that was also a single powerful declaration, echoed in his spirit, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder." Isaiah's heart leaped in his chest. Government, authority, this was the answer his people craved. A king to deliver them. The voice continued, and with each title it bestowed upon the child, Isaiah's spirit soared higher. "And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Isaiah opened his eyes, startled, gasping for air as if he had just surfaced from a deep sea. His heart was racing, pounding a triumphant rhythm against his ribs. "A Prince of Peace," he whispered, the words tasting like honey and hope. Mighty God. He scrambled to his feet, his weariness forgotten, his spirit electrified. Still trying to grasp the sheer magnitude of what he had just seen, he ran. Without wasting a moment, Isaiah descended the hill and sprinted through the awakening streets of Jerusalem. He found a small group of early risers gathered at the entrance to the marketplace, merchants setting up their stalls, women on their way to the well. Without hesitation, he began to proclaim, his voice ringing with a joy and power they had never heard from him before. "Listen, people of Judah, you who walk in darkness, there is hope. The Lord has revealed to me that a child will be born, a son will be given. He will bring a government of justice and everlasting peace. His name shall be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. People stopped what they were doing. Some looked at him, their expressions curious, a flicker of interest in their tired eyes. Others remained skeptical, their hearts too callous by hardship to accept good news so easily. A middle-aged man, a spice merchant with a cynical face, crossed his arms and shouted, "Another child, Isaiah! Wasn't the impossible story of Immanuel enough for you? Now you come with yet another prophecy of a babe who will be a king. Where is this king? We need soldiers now, not lullabies." But a woman, holding her own small, underfed child in her arms, approached him hesitantly, her eyes pleading. "When, Isaiah? When will this child be born? We are so tired of waiting for a salvation that never comes." Isaiah looked at her, his gaze soft with empathy. "I do not know when," he answered honestly, "but I know that God fulfills what he promises. This light will come." Jeremiah, ever at his side, pulled him into a quiet corner. "Isaiah," he said, a note of cautious optimism in his voice, "this is a different message. A message of power, of victory. Perhaps this is what they will finally listen to." "It is a piece of the puzzle, my friend," Isaiah replied, his fist clenched with conviction. "But the message is not mine to edit. I must speak what I am shown." That night, lying on his small bed, Isaiah could barely sleep. The glorious words of the vision echoed endlessly in his mind. "Prince of Peace, Mighty God, Everlasting Father." "Lord," he asked in fervent prayer, "how can a simple child, born of flesh and blood, bear such grand divine titles? Who will this son be? How will we recognize him?" The following days were a whirlwind. Isaiah proclaimed the coming of the Prince of Peace in every square and at every gate. A small faction of followers began to gather around him, their spirits lifted by this new promise of a victorious king. But even as the small flame of hope was kindled, a new, unsettling shadow began to fall over the prophet's spirit. During his prayers, the majestic vision of the king began to be interrupted by flashes of a different figure. A man whose presence was as quiet and unassuming as the king's, was glorious and commanding. One evening, while in deep meditation, Isaiah had another vision. This time there was no triumphant chorus, no brilliant light. He saw a man of humble appearance, his face marked not by authority, but by a deep, abiding sorrow. His shoulders were bent, as if he carried an invisible, crushing burden. A soft yet firm voice echoed in his mind, a voice different from the thunderous proclamation of the king. "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will bring justice to the nations." Isaiah opened his eyes, a cold sweat on his brow. "A servant," he murmured, his mind reeling. "Who is this man?" The vision continued, fragmented and confusing. "He will not cry out or raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out." The contrast was staggering. The Prince of Peace, the mighty God, would surely arrive with thunder and lightning, with a voice that shook the foundations of the earth. But this servant was quiet, gentle, unassuming. The paradox began to torment Isaiah. He spent hours in his study, the scrolls of his prophecies spread out before him. On one side, the words describing the glorious king. On the other, the new, strange verses about the gentle servant. They felt like two different people, two opposite destinies. He tried to explain it to Jeremiah one afternoon as they walked near the Kidron Valley. "Jeremiah, I had another vision." "Another one?" his friend asked, a worried look creasing his brow. "Was it about the king?" No, Isaiah shook his head, clearly confused. This time it was different. It was not about a king or a government or judgment. It was about a man, a servant. Jeremiah frowned. "A servant? I do not know." But he was special. There was something divine about him, and at the same time, such profound humility. He brings justice, but he does it without shouting, without force. He carries suffering, Jeremiah, as if it were his own. Jeremiah was silent for a moment, trying to process the contradiction. Isaiah, he finally said, "Do you think this man is already among us?" "I do not know," the prophet replied, looking toward the horizon. "But I feel his mission, and the mission of the king. They are somehow connected, yet I cannot see how. One is a lion, the other a lamb. How can the Messiah be both?" That night, the visions grew more disturbing. While praying, Isaiah saw the servant again. This time, the image was more personal, more painful. He saw men approaching the servant, their faces twisted with contempt. He heard the voice again, narrating the servant's own words. "I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting." Isaiah cried out, falling to his knees. The mighty God would never allow himself to be spat upon. The everlasting Father would not offer his back to be beaten. A chill of profound dread ran down his spine. For the first time, Isaiah had the distinct and terrifying impression that the story being revealed to him was far more complex and far more painful than he had ever imagined. He was on the verge of discovering something that would change everything he believed about God's plan for salvation. He held the glorious vision of a crown and the horrific vision of a cross, and for the life of him he could not understand how they could possibly belong to the same man. Little by little, Isaiah's new words about the mysterious, quiet servant began to echo more loudly through the fractured streets of Jerusalem. But instead of bringing the comfort of a shared burden, they stirred a potent cocktail of confusion, irritation, and above all, outright rejection. The people had been primed for the coming of a glorious king, a mighty God who would shatter their enemies. This talk of a gentle, suffering servant felt like a bait-and-switch, a cruel joke played by a prophet who seemed increasingly detached from their desperate reality. On a bleak, cloudy morning, Isaiah stood at one of the busiest street corners in the city, near the fish gate, where the noise and smell of daily life were thick in the air. His voice was no longer triumphant as it had been when he spoke of the Prince of Peace. It rang firm, yet was heavy with a sorrow that seemed to emanate from the depths of his soul. "Listen, O house of Israel, the Lord has revealed his servant to me, a man of sorrows, intimately acquainted with the deepest grief. He will be despised and rejected by men." Passers-by stopped for a moment, their curiosity piqued by the shift in his tone. Some looked on with cold disdain, others with a weary indifference that was somehow worse. "There he goes again," muttered a merchant, adjusting the sacks of grain on his donkey. "Always speaking of suffering. Who wants to hear about that? We live in suffering. We want to hear about victory, about salvation, not about a God who champions pain." Isaiah continued, his gaze seeming to look through the crowd, as if fixed on the vision replaying in his mind. He ignored the piercing stares and the contemptuous whispers. "The servant will offer his back to those who strike him, and his cheeks to those who pull out his beard. He will not hide his face from insults, or from the filth of their spit. He will be humiliated, yet he will not open his mouth to defend himself." Suddenly, a stone, small but sharp, flew from the crowd and hit the ground just beside his feet, skittering across the cobblestones. "Blasphemy!" shouted a man, his face contorted with rage, his hand still poised from the throw. "I am done with your words of doom. Our God is a warrior, not a victim." Other voices joined the chorus of anger. "Shut up, prophet of sorrow. Why would God choose a weak, pathetic man to be his servant? We want a liberator, a warrior who will break the Assyrian yoke from our necks, not a lamb to be pitied." Isaiah felt his chest tighten, a familiar ache of loneliness spreading through him. Even surrounded by a throng of his own people, the weight of solitude pressed down heavier than ever before. Later that afternoon, as he returned to the quiet street where he lived, he was met with a confrontation that hurt even more deeply than the stones of the crowd. His own cousin, Eliab, a man with whom he had grown up, sharing secrets and dreams under the Judean sun, was waiting for him at his door. Eliab's face was a storm of anger and anxiety. "Isaiah," Eliab began, his voice a harsh whisper, glancing around nervously to make sure no one was listening. "I have come to ask you, to beg you, please. Stop this. For the sake of our family, stop." "Stop what, Eliab?" Isaiah responded, his own voice breaking slightly. "Stop speaking the words God gives me. People are saying you have gone mad," Eliab hissed, taking a step closer. "No one wants to do business with our family anymore. My daughters, your own nieces, are being avoided by their friends at the well. Our relatives, Isaiah, they are ashamed of your name. You are bringing ruin upon us all with this talk of a beaten servant." Isaiah lowered his head, the blow cutting deeper than any stone. "Eliab, I did not choose this path, but God chose me. I cannot stay silent." His cousin clenched his fists in utter frustration. "Then bear the consequences alone. Don't count on me or anyone else in this family to stand by you while you tear our lives apart." Without waiting for a reply, Eliab turned and stormed away, leaving Isaiah standing alone, the dust of his cousin's angry departure settling around him. Jeremiah, who had watched the painful exchange from a distance, approached cautiously. "Isaiah, even your own family now, even them." Isaiah could only nod, his eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. That night, Isaiah did not go home. He withdrew into the vast, silent emptiness of the temple after the evening rituals were complete. He fell to his knees before the great altar, the place where his mission had begun, and he cried out, his voice echoing in the hallowed space. "Lord, how long will I be mocked? How long will I be rejected by those I love? Is this the suffering you spoke of? Is this the cup I must drink?" As he wept, his body racked with sobs, a new vision began to take shape, more vivid and more terrifying than any before. The servant was there again, clearer now than ever. Isaiah saw the gentle-eyed man being shoved through a hostile crowd, beaten with fists, spat upon by faces twisted in hate. The servant remained silent, his dignity an unbreachable fortress, enduring every blow without a single word of retaliation. Isaiah cried out in agony, his own body flinching with every imagined impact. "Why? Why so much suffering? Who is this man, Lord, that he can absorb so much hatred?" But the vision did not end there. It intensified, spiraling into a nightmare of brutality. Isaiah's gaze was drawn to a detail he had not noticed before. He saw blood. The servant's face was covered in it, but it was not just from the blows. It was flowing from gruesome, open wounds on his back, as if he had been scourged, punished publicly, humiliated like the lowest of criminals. Isaiah saw the whip rise and fall, a horrifying instrument laced with bone and metal, designed to tear flesh from bone. He heard the sickening wet thud of each lash. "My God, what is this?" Isaiah covered his face in despair, but he could not shut off the sight. Who would commit such unspeakable cruelty against an innocent man? His heart hammered against his ribs, the tears falling uncontrollably. And there, alone and rejected on the cold temple floor, the prophet finally understood that the pain he carried, the rejection from his family and his people, was only a faint, pathetic shadow of the pain that this servant would one day endure for them. The vision shifted again, becoming even more focused, even more horrifying. He saw them leading the servant, his back a raw, bloody canvas of agony, up a small hill. He saw them throw a rough, hewn wooden beam to the ground and force the servant down upon it. "What are they doing?" Isaiah whispered in horror. He watched as they stretched the servant's arms out along another beam, laid across the first. He saw thick iron spikes, long and cruel, and a heavy mallet. He saw a soldier place the point of a spike against the servant's open palm. Isaiah screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure horror that was swallowed by the temple's silence. He saw the mallet rise and fall, and he heard a sickening crunch of bone and sinew. He saw it again, on the other hand. And then, on his feet, this was a form of execution so barbaric, so utterly alien, that Isaiah had no name for it, no frame of reference in all the annals of Israelite justice, or even pagan cruelty. He watched, paralyzed as they raised the wooden structure, and the full weight of the servant's body hung from the spikes, tearing at his flesh. And as he watched this ultimate act of degradation, the divine voice spoke again, the words now landing with the force of physical blows. "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Pierced. The word exploded in Isaiah's mind. It was not a metaphor, it was real. He was watching it. He was watching an innocent man be pierced, be crushed, for transgressions he did not commit, for iniquities that belonged to others, to his people, to Eliab, to the men who threw stones, to Isaiah himself. The realization was a weight so immense it felt as if the entire temple was collapsing upon him. He had been a prophet of judgment, warning of punishment for sin, but he had never, in his wildest nightmares, imagined that the judgment would not fall on the guilty but would be absorbed, willingly, by the innocent. He had seen the terrifying detail. The suffering was not a tragedy. It was a transaction, and the price was impossibly high. Isaiah could not sleep. He did not even try. The images from the last vision were burned onto the inside of his eyelids, a relentless, repeating nightmare that haunted him night after night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that man's face, the servant, a gaze so full of pain, of rejection, and yet at the same time of a strange and inexplicable compassion. He saw the spikes. He heard the sickening crunch of bone. He felt the suffocating darkness as the servant's life ebbed away. On a cold morning, long before the first hint of dawn, Isaiah climbed the same hill where he had prayed so many times before. He did not come to seek answers this time. He came to grieve. He knelt, his face pressed to the cold, hard ground, and cried out in the agony of a soul that had witnessed too much. "Lord, please, I cannot bear this anymore. Why did you make me see this? Why did you show me the death of the innocent?" And once again, as had happened so many times before, the heavens seemed to tear open before his spiritual eyes. The vision came, not gently, but with a relentless and terrifying force. Isaiah was back there, at the foot of that crude wooden execution device. He saw the servant, his body limp and lifeless, his head slumped on his chest. He saw the soldiers take the body down, a dead weight, and hand it to a grieving few. He saw them wrap it in clean linen cloths and lay it in a new tomb, carved into a rock. He saw them roll a great heavy stone over the entrance, sealing the darkness within. The finality was absolute. The silence was the silence of the grave. Despair, thick and black, washed over Isaiah. This was the end of the story. Suffering, injustice, and then nothingness. But then, something new began to happen. Something that defied all logic, all experience, all the laws of life and death. As Isaiah watched the sealed tomb in his vision, a light began to emanate from within it. It was not the light of a torch or a lamp. It was a pure, white, intense light, a brilliance that pulsed with life and power, pushing against the stone as if it could not be contained. Isaiah instinctively closed his eyes, but the scene unfolding before him remained astonishingly clear. With a silent, explosive force, the great stone was rolled away, not by human hands, but by an unseen power, and from the darkness of the tomb, a figure emerged. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. It was the servant, the one he had just seen, beaten, pierced, scourged, and killed. He was standing, alive. "No," Isaiah whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. "This cannot be." He opened his physical eyes wide, trying to erase the vision, to ground himself in the reality of the cold hilltop. But when he closed them again, the image persisted, more vivid than before. The servant was not a ghost, not a phantom. He was solid, real. His face was serene, his eyes full of a life so potent it seemed to set the very air around him shimmering. The scars of his suffering were still there, the marks of the nails in his hands and feet, the wound in his side, but they were no longer grotesque symbols of defeat. They glowed with a soft golden light, transformed into emblems of an unimaginable victory. Something else had taken the place of agony. It was a peace that passed all understanding, a power that made Isaiah, even in his vision, tremble with awe. A soft voice, like a divine whisper that was also as loud as thunder, echoed within his spirit, weaving meaning into the impossible sight before him. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. Isaiah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Light. Satisfied? After such suffering, he covered his face with his hands, trying to contain the storm of emotions, disbelief, terror, wonder, and a dawning explosive joy that threatened to tear him apart. He abruptly rose from the ground and began pacing back and forth on the hilltop like a caged animal. "This is impossible," he repeated, his voice a raw cry against the morning stillness. "No one returns from death, no one." The sound of footsteps scrambling up the hill interrupted his frantic thoughts. Jeremiah, his face etched with worry, appeared over the rise, out of breath. "Isaiah, rumors are spreading through the city like fire. People are gathering in the marketplace, demanding that you stop speaking. They say your words are disturbing everyone, driving them to despair." Isaiah stopped his pacing. His eyes, fixed on a point far beyond the horizon, seemed to see through his friend. He responded in a low, trembling voice, "Jeremiah, what I have just seen, even I can barely believe it." "What is it?" Jeremiah stepped closer, alarmed by the wild, ecstatic look in Isaiah's eyes. Isaiah took a deep, shuddering breath, as if struggling to find the right words in any human language to describe the miracle he had witnessed. "I saw life after death," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw the servant, the one who was crushed, the one who was pierced, the one who was buried. Jeremiah, I saw him standing alive, as if death itself had been defeated and swallowed up in victory." Jeremiah stepped back, his face a mask of stunned incomprehension. "Isaiah, that is impossible. That is madness." "I know," the prophet replied, and now tears were falling slowly, tears not of sorrow but of overwhelming wonder. "But I saw it with these eyes. It is the truth." Isaiah walked back to the spot where he had been praying, picked up the scroll and stylus he had brought with him, and with hands that still trembled, he began to write once more, the words flowing from a place of divine revelation. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, and though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. He paused for a moment, his stylus hovering over the parchment, reflecting on the impossible weight of each word he was writing. "He will prolong his days," he repeated, trying to understand. "Does that mean he will live on, even after being crushed by the weight of our sin?" Jeremiah, still in shock, sat down on a rock beside him. "Isaiah, do you realize what you are saying? You are writing that a man, a real man, will die a brutal death, and then live again." Isaiah nodded slowly, his face illuminated by the rising sun. "That is exactly it. And more." He looked at his friend, his eyes full of a fiery awe. "He will not just live again, Jeremiah. He will see the reward for his soul's suffering. He will witness the fruit of his sacrifice. It is as if death did not have the final word over him. It was just a doorway." Silence fell upon the hilltop, broken only by the morning breeze. Isaiah knew that revealing this to the people would bring even more mockery, more rejection, more pain. Who in their right mind would believe in a resurrection? Who would accept such an outrageous, logic-defying prophecy? He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered a prayer. "Lord, I am standing at the edge of something my mind cannot grasp. I need understanding. I need your strength to proclaim this impossible hope." In that moment, as the wind blew gently, Isaiah felt a new and unshakable conviction settle into his heart. The visions of judgment, the visions of suffering, they were not the end of the story. They were the necessary prelude to the greatest victory imaginable. This revelation fueled a new fire in his soul. He now understood that his mission was not just to warn, but to offer a hope that was stronger than death itself. He rushed back down into the city, his face radiant. He went not to the corner to preach judgment, but to a place where the poor and the broken-hearted gathered. His voice, once heavy with sorrow, now rang with a joy that was infectious. "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me," he declared, and the words of Isaiah chapter 61 poured from him, no longer as a future hope, but as a present reality he had just witnessed. "Because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." An elderly woman, whose son had been killed in a border skirmish, looked up at him, her eyes still red from weeping. "Prophet," she asked, "how can you speak of joy when our hearts are full of ashes?" Isaiah knelt before her, his own eyes brimming with tears of empathy and triumph. "Because I have seen the one who turns our ashes into a crown of beauty. I have seen the one who gives us the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. After the darkest night, the sun rises again." God has not forgotten us. He has made a way where there was no way. For the first time, he saw more than just rejection in the faces of his listeners. He saw attentive eyes, open hearts, people desperate and willing to hear about a better future. Isaiah had been shown the pain, the judgment, and now the glorious redemption. But he still felt there was one more piece, a final revelation that would tie it all together, that would give ultimate meaning to every word he had ever written. He now understood the what. He was beginning to understand the why. But the final revelation, the true and staggering answer to the question of why his book would become the most astonishing in the Bible, was still to come. Isaiah awoke, yet he had not truly been asleep. He had been somewhere else, on the edge of eternity, witnessing the grand sweep of a divine plan. He was still on his knees, his face resting on the cold, unforgiving stone floor of his small home. The first light of dawn was slowly creeping into the room, casting long, golden beams through the cracks in the window, painting stripes of hope across the dusty air. His body ached. His knees were bruised and raw, but a profound and unprecedented peace had settled over his soul. It was not the quiet peace of rest, but the deep, resonant peace of final understanding. The tension, the agonizing paradox that had tormented him for so long, the lion and the lamb, the king and the servant, the crown and the cross, had finally dissolved. He had not resolved the contradiction. He had seen its perfect, breathtaking union. He stood up slowly, washed his face, and took a deep, steadying breath. With hands that no longer trembled, he picked up a new, clean scroll. Something in his spirit, a divine and overwhelming urgency, compelled him. This was the final piece, the capstone. He closed his eyes, and the visions returned, not as chaotic, painful fragments, but as a seamless, flowing tapestry, a single, coherent story. He saw the young woman, bathed in ethereal light, her face a portrait of purity and grace the Virgin, and the promised sign of Immanuel, God with us. The image dissolved into that of a child, a son given, with the government of all creation resting on his tiny shoulders, the wonderful counselor, the mighty God. He saw this king grow, not with a sword in his hand, but with wisdom in his eyes, bringing comfort to the afflicted, healing to the sick, and freedom to the oppressed. Then the scene shifted, the light dimming. He saw the scorn, the betrayal, the rejection by the very people he came to save. He saw the suffering, the back offered to the strikers, the cheeks to those who pulled out his beard. He saw the trial, the silence of a lamb before its shearers. He saw the brutal, bloody climax, the scourging, the piercing of hands and feet, the death on that horrific wooden structure. And then, after the suffocating darkness of the tomb, he saw the explosive, world-altering light. He saw life emerging where there had only been death. He saw the resurrected servant, the victorious king, standing in glory, the scars on his body now shining like stars. Isaiah opened his eyes. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. "My God," he whispered, his voice breaking with the sheer weight of the revelation. "It all points to him. Everything I saw, every word I declared, It is all about one single man, one single Savior. At that moment, Jeremiah rushed into the room, his face itched with alarm. "Isaiah, are you all right? I heard you cry out." "You look pale." Isaiah turned to look at his friend, but his eyes were shining with a light that seemed to come from another world, as if he were seeing beyond the confines of a small room, beyond the borders of his own time. "Jeremiah," he said, his voice a mixture of trembling emotion and unshakable awe, "I understand now. I finally understand. Understand what—" Isaiah took a deep breath, the words pouring out of him like a flood. "All the visions, Jeremiah. Every single one. Every word of judgment. Every promise of redemption. Every image of suffering. And every glimpse of glory. It all converges on one person. The Messiah. The servant is Immanuel. Immanuel is the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace is the one pierced for our transgressions. They are all him, one man, one plan, one Savior." Jeremiah stood in stunned silence, his mouth slightly agape. "But Isaiah, how can that be? You are speaking of things that must happen centuries from now. How can you be so certain?" Isaiah picked up the scroll he had just begun, and, with a firm, confident voice, recited the words that were burning in his soul. "He shall see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities." The prophet set down his stylus, his eyes brimming with tears of awe as he looked at his friend. "Jeremiah," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "do not. You see, I am not just writing prophecy. I am writing the gospel itself, even before it happens." Isaiah rose, walked to the window, and gazed out at the awakening city, at the people who had mocked him, rejected him, and called him a madman. A deep, divine love welled up inside him. "The nations will see him," he declared to the morning air. "Kings will shut their mouths because of him. He will be exalted and lifted up and highly glorified. But before that, he will be rejected, pierced, and crushed for us." At that moment, a deep and final certainty filled Isaiah's heart. He had been chosen not merely to be a messenger of warning, but to be a scribe of salvation, to record the greatest and most beautiful plan in the history of humanity. A plan that would only be fully understood centuries later, but which was beginning to unfold right there, in each line, in every prophecy that flowed from his mouth. And now, as we stand centuries later, the ink of Isaiah's scroll long dry, the dust of his Jerusalem buried under layers of history. Do you understand? Do you see why the book of Isaiah is the most astonishing book in the Bible? Because when a baby was born to a virgin in the small town of Bethlehem, the prophecy of Immanuel was fulfilled. When that boy grew and taught in the synagogues, declaring, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me," reading from Isaiah's own scroll, the prophecy of the Anointed One was fulfilled. When he stood silent before his accusers, Pilate and Herod, the prophecy of the silent Lamb was fulfilled. When he was scourged, beaten, and nailed to a Roman cross, pierced in his hands, feet, and side, the prophecy of the suffering servant was fulfilled with a horrifying, heartbreaking precision that defies all logic and chance. And when he rose from a borrowed tomb on the third day, conquering death itself, the prophecy of the resurrected victor, who would see the light of life, was fulfilled. Every detail, from the virgin birth to the brutal suffering, from the rejection by his own people to his ultimate resurrection and glory, was fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And what about the prophecies yet to be fulfilled? Isaiah also spoke of a second coming, of a glorious return, of a new heaven and a new earth, the kingdom of eternal peace, where God himself will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. Isaiah chapter 25:8. Isaiah's words are not just an ancient historical record. They are a living invitation. They are a call for you to choose, to trust just as he did, even in the face of rejection, to proclaim hope, even in the midst of crisis, to believe in God's promises, even when everything around you screams the opposite. If Isaiah, living in the shadows 7 centuries before Christ, could see so clearly what we would only come to understand much later, imagine what God can still reveal to you today. And so, the question that has echoed through time, from Isaiah's lips to our own hearts, is simple yet powerful. What about you? Are you ready to live with the same faith and courage as Isaiah? Are you ready to believe that just as every word from that time was fulfilled, God's promises for your own life will also come true? The book of Isaiah is not just history. It is living testimony that God speaks, and when He speaks, nothing, not time, not empires, not even death itself can stop His word from being fulfilled. Rise, believe, proclaim, because the same God who called Isaiah is calling you today. If you enjoyed this story, 2 more videos featuring equally inspiring biblical characters will now appear on your screen. Click watch, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. May God speak to you, just as He spoke to Isaiah, in the most unexpected and life-changing moments